The sun was slipping toward the teeth of the western hills, bleeding its last light across the prairie, when the rancher noticed a movement. He'd been fixing the sagging hinge on the corral gate, his shoulders stiff from a day that had worn the same rhythm as all the days before it. Quiet, lonesome, unbroken except for the wind's hollow song. Out here, time didn't pass so much as it settled, the way dust did after a stampede. He'd learned to live with the weight of it. The shapes were far off at first, no more than faint dark strokes in the shimmering haze, and he thought they might be antelope straying near the fence line. But antelope moved with a quick, startled grace. These shapes dragged themselves forward in slow, deliberate strides, the heat lifting in waves around them. His brow tightened. He leaned his forearms on the top rail, narrowing his gaze. 2 figures. On foot, not a common sight on this stretch of land. 20 miles from the nearest town, and twice that from the next. Between them came a third, a man older than himself, hair knotted and streaked with the gray of long years under the sun. The light caught the man's face, but it was the way the 2 smaller figures moved beside him that caught the rancher's attention. They walked close together, their arms brushing, and their pace was steady but tired, as if they'd been at it for days. When they reached the edge of the yard, the older man lifted his hand. The gesture was neither a greeting nor a threat, more like a signal that he meant to speak. The rancher straightened, brushing dust from his palms, and waited. The air smelled of dry grass and distant rain. "I bring them to you," the man said, his voice like stone worn smooth by the river. His English was thick with an Apache cadence. "Please accept these 2 Apache girls." The words hung there, strange and bare. The girls, both young women, neither more than 20, stood silent, their dark eyes fixed on him. They wore long skirts, torn at the hem, and dust clung to their braids. He could not tell if the wariness in their faces came from fear, distrust, or something else entirely. "I don't understand," the rancher said. "Why me?" The man's gaze did not waver. "Because you must." It wasn't an answer, but the tone suggested there would be no other given. The man shifted his weight, glanced at the fading sky, and then at the girls. He touched one lightly on the shoulder, murmured something in Apache, and stepped back. The girls did not follow. "Wait." The rancher began, but the older man had already turned, walking toward the open prairie. His stride was as unhurried as when he'd arrived, and he did not look back. In moments, the distance swallowed him, and then the darkening horizon took the rest. The girls stood where he had left them, watching the rancher with an unreadable patience. He felt the weight of the moment pressing in, the silence between them broken only by the rattle of the windmill. "You have somewhere to go?" he asked. One of them shook her head, a small, deliberate movement. The other glanced toward the clouds stacking in the east, heavy with the promise of rain. Neither stepped forward. He had spent years mastering the art of living alone. His cabin was a place built for one man's habits. One chair at the table, one bed, shelves crowded with tools rather than comforts. Company was something he could choose, and lately he had chosen not to, but the prairie didn't give much room for turning away travelers at night, especially with a storm building. He gestured toward the porch. "Come on, then." They followed without speaking, their footsteps soft on the packed dirt. Inside, the light from the kerosene lamp caught in their hair and made the shadows on their faces seem deeper. They stood near the door while he fetched a pot of water from the barrel, poured them each a tin cup. They drank quickly, like people who hadn't trusted their last source. The taller of the 2 studied him openly, her gaze flicking over his face, his hands, the worn leather of his vest. The other kept her eyes lowered, glancing only at the small iron stove in the corner. "Where'd you come from?" he asked. They exchanged a glance, silent, and he felt the question slide into the empty space between them. The storm outside moved closer, thunder rumbling far off. He could hear the wind change its pitch. "You can sleep here tonight," he said finally. "Tomorrow—" The taller one stepped forward, the lamplight catching the sharpness of her cheekbones. Her voice was low, steady, and certain when she spoke. "We know about the scar." The word struck him harder than he expected. His first instinct was to deny knowledge, deny memory, but the tone in her voice told him it would be useless. She wasn't guessing. She knew. For a moment, All he could hear was the ticking of the stove as it cooled. He wanted to ask which scar she meant. There were more than a few, but deep inside he already knew. The one no one had seen in years. The one earned in a night he'd done his best to forget. Outside, lightning flashed over the hills, and the girl stood in its afterglow like shapes pulled from another life. The rancher felt the walls of his solitary world shift, tilting towards something he had not asked for and could not walk away from. The rain began to fall, slow and heavy, as if the prairie itself knew what was coming. Morning came on slow, with a pale light leaking through the low clouds. The storm had passed in the night, leaving the air damp and cool, the smell of wet dust seeping into the cabin. The rancher rose early out of habit, stoking the stove until it popped and hissed, the flames reflecting in the small iron door. He was used to the sound of his own movements at dawn, but now there were other sounds. Soft steps, a muted clink of tin, the faint scrape of cloth against wood. The two girls were already awake. The taller one was at the table, rolling the sleeves of her faded blouse, hands resting still for a moment before she began cutting the end off a loaf of bread with a small, dull knife. The other knelt near the stove, tending to the pot of coffee he'd left the night before. They moved with an economy of motion, silent except for the small sounds of work, as if they had long ago learned that words were costly. He poured coffee for himself, leaning against the counter, watching them with the guarded curiosity of a man try and make sense of something that had no clear shape. The taller girl caught his gaze but didn't look away. "You said you know about the scar," he said. She nodded once. "We do." Her voice was calm, but he noticed the way her fingers pressed into the edge of the table. The other girl glanced up briefly, her dark eyes flicking between them, before returning to the pot. "What do you think you know?" The taller girl hesitated, as though weighing how much to reveal. "It was a long time ago. You remember the river canyon. The fire." His stomach tightened. There was no reason anyone should know that night except a few who had been there, and most of them were long dead. He took a slow sip of coffee to hide the shift in his breathing. "I've been in a lot of canyons," he said finally. She didn't smile. "Not like that one." Silence filled the room again, thick and deliberate. He found himself glancing toward the window. The land beyond was open, empty in the morning haze, but habit made him search the ridges. Out here, danger announced itself in small ways. Shadows where there shouldn't be any, a flicker of movement on the horizon. "You expecting someone to follow you?" he asked. The shorter girl's voice came for the first time, soft but certain. "They will come." "Who?" "Men who want what we carry." She didn't look up from the coffee, as if saying it aloud was enough to make the truth heavier. He set his cup down, the weight of her words pulling at him. Strangers out here meant trouble more often than not, and trouble in the form of armed men had a way of staying until blood was spilled. After breakfast, they moved outside. The sun was hidden behind thick gray clouds, the air carrying a thin mist that clung to skin. The girls followed him to the barn, helping without needing to be asked, stacking small bales, filling water troughs, mending a section of fence that had pulled loose in the wind. They worked in silence, and he noticed the calluses on their hands, the efficiency of their movements. These were not hands untested by labor. From the corner of his eye, he caught the taller girl scanning the hills the way he had earlier, her gaze sharp and searching. She knew what it meant to be hunted. When the chores were done, they sat near the corral rail, the horses shifting restlessly on the damp ground. The taller one finally spoke again. "You were marked." "By who?" "Our father." The words settled between them with unexpected weight. He remembered flashes, heat, shouting, the smell of smoke. An Apache warrior with eyes like burning coals, charging into a hail of bullets, a slash of steel cutting across his ribs. He'd thought it nothing more than a fight for survival, an accident of war. "Why?" he asked. The girl's expression didn't change. "Because he wanted you to remember. Because someday we would find you." He studied them both, searching for the truth behind their eyes. "And now that you found me?" The shorter one answered. "Now you have to help us." The simplicity of the statement left no room for argument, yet he felt the urge to resist. He'd built his life away from other people's wars. But the scar, the one carved into him all those years ago, suddenly felt like a debt coming due. That night, as darkness settled over the land, he kept the lamp low and the rifle close. The girls slept in the loft above, the sound of their breathing steady against the quiet. He sat at the table, staring at the flame of the lamp, his mind running the shape of the canyon again and again. A sound pulled him from his thoughts. A horse, somewhere out past a barn. Not close enough to be a threat yet, but not far enough to ignore. He moved to the window, peering into the darkness. On the ridge, a lone rider sat his horse, still as a cut of stone, the outline barely visible against the clouds. The rancher watched him for a long moment, the air in his lungs heavy. The rider didn't move, didn't call out, just watched. Then, as quietly as he'd appeared, he turned and vanished over the rise. The rancher stayed at the window long after the shape was gone, listening to the wind scrape over the land. Upstairs, the girls shifted in their sleep, unaware. The scar along his ribs ached in the cool air, as if remembering something his mind wasn't ready to face. The wind carried the scent of wood smoke long before the knock came. It was near midnight, the prairie moon hidden behind a bank of cloud, when the sound rattled against the cabin door, 3 slow, deliberate strikes. The rancher's hand went to the rifle leaning against the wall. Upstairs, the boards creaked faintly. The girls awake now, their breathing hushed. He moved to the door without lighting a lamp, his shadow stretching across the floor in the pale light that seeped through the window. "Who's there?" he called, voice low but edged. A man's voice answered, smooth but carrying the rough grain of long miles. Just a traveler, passing through. Thought I might find a warm fire. The rancher's grip tightened on the rifle. "We're not taking visitors tonight." There was a pause. Then the man spoke again, closer this time. "Shame. I hear you've got something worth keeping. Something worth a fortune." The word struck like a match in the dark. He swung the door open just far enough to see a shape on the porch, a tall figure in a trail coat, hat brim shadowing his face. Behind him, 2 more men lingered in the yard, their outlines faint against the silver grass. "You'd best ride on," the rancher said. The man smiled without warmth. "I will, but you can't keep them hidden forever." He stepped back into the night, boots whispering on the dirt. The 3 figures melted into the darkness, the only sound a faint jingle of tack fading into the distance. The rancher barred the door and turned toward the loft. The girls were crouched at the edge, eyes wide, muscles taut as wire. "You know him?" he asked. The taller one shook her head. "Not him, but the man he works for." They came down, standing in the lamplight like shadows made flesh. The shorter girl spoke first. His face is burned, all down one side. "He killed our father." The taller one added, "And he will kill you, too, if he knows who you are." The rancher felt the weight of her gaze, the words settling into him like cold iron. "And why would he care who I am?" "Because the scar you carry," she said, "is the proof he fears most." He didn't answer right away. He was thinking of that night in the canyon, the chaos and fire, the blade that had opened his ribs. He'd thought it was meant to kill him. Now he wasn't sure. They told him in fragments, their voices low, the fire snapping between their words. Years ago, their father had led a small band against the outlaws' men. The fight had been brutal, the air thick with smoke. Their father had marked the rancher deliberately, so that if the outlaw ever rose to power, there would be someone who could stand before a council, before the law, and swear to the man's crimes. "He doesn't fear bullets," the shorter one said. "He fears the truth." The rancher looked at them both. They were not just running from danger. They were carrying it with them. By morning, the sky had turned the color of old pewter, the wind sharpening at its edges. He checked the stock of his rifle, laid out ammunition, and filled the water barrel to the brim. The girls worked alongside him without needing instruction, hauling wood, securing the barn doors, testing the hinges on the cellar hatch. He sent them below for the night, the cellar stocked with water, bread, and the old revolver he hadn't touched in years. "You don't come out until I call for you," he told them. They didn't argue, but the taller one lingered at the top of the steps. "He won't come alone." The afternoon dragged into evening, The land beyond the fence quiet but watchful. Then, just as the sun began to sink, the first light appeared on the horizon. Not sunlight, torchlight. One flame, then another, until a slow-moving cluster glowed against the dusk. The rancher stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, and counted shapes moving in the dark. Too many to meet in open ground. They were still far off, but the way they advanced told him all he needed. They weren't scouts. They were here to finish something. He backed into the house, closing the door without a sound. His heartbeat was steady, but the old ache in his side throbbed, a reminder that this had been coming for longer than he'd known. Outside, the torchlight spread into a line. The night air grew heavy, carrying the low murmur of men preparing themselves for violence. The rancher set his rifle against a window frame and waited, the cellar door beneath his feet like a quiet promise. The land around the cabin had never felt so small. Rain began as a whisper, a thin patter on the roof, then swelled until it drummed against the boards like 1,000 small fists. Through the narrow slit of the window, the torchlight wavered, flaring and dimming as the wind twisted through the yard. The rancher steadied his rifle on the sill, eyes sweeping the shadows beyond the glow. Shapes moved there, men shifting, horses tossing their heads, the muted clink of bridles cutting through the rain. He breathed slow, feeling the grain of the rifle stock under his palm. Every creak of the floor, every sigh of the wind seemed to tighten the air inside the cabin. Below, in the cellar, the girls waited. He could almost feel their presence beneath his boots, their stillness pressed into the earth. A voice called out from the dark, deep and roughened by smoke and whiskey. "Send them out, and we'll let you walk away." The rancher said nothing. He shifted his weight, watching the flicker of movement. A man stepping closer, rifle slung, hat brim low. "You got no stake in this," the voice went on. "They ain't yours." Still he held his tongue. Words wouldn't turn men like these. Only steel and lead might. The first shot cracked through the storm, splintering the frame above his head. He returned fire instantly, the muzzle flash lighting the room for a heartbeat. Someone shouted, followed by the thud of boots in the mud. The fight came hard and close. Bullets tore into the porch posts, glass shattered, rain sweeping in with the wind. The rancher moved from window to door, each shot measured, each movement practiced from years of hunting in rough country. 2 men went down before they reached the barn, their bodies swallowed by the churned mud. Then came the rush, 3 of them at once, charging from the blind side. He met them at the porch, the rifles but swinging hard into a jaw, the next man dropping to a blast of buckshot. The third made it to the doorframe, knife flashing, but the rancher caught his arm, twisting until bone gave way. The man crumpled, cursing into the rain. A sudden glow lit the yard, not torches this time, but fire. The barn was burning, flames licking upward, orange against the night. In the flicker of that light, a new figure emerged from the storm. He knew the face before he saw it fully. The left side a ruin of melted flesh, the eye on that side pale and clouded. The burn-scarred man walked with slow certainty, a revolver loose in his hand. The rancher stepped out onto the porch, mud sucking at his boots. They faced each other in the wash of firelight, the rain hissing on hot wood. "You remember me?" The man said, "I do. That mark on your side, that's mine." The rancher shook his head. "No, that's your death." The man's smile was a broken curve. "Then let's finish it." The duel was ugly and close. The first shot from the outlaw tore through the rancher's shoulder, spinning him sideways. He dropped to one knee, firing twice. One shot missed, the other grazing the outlaw's thigh. They circled in the mud, breath heaving, eyes locked. The outlaw lunged, knocking the rifle away, and they crashed together in a tangle of fists, boots, and rain. The rancher's hand found the knife at his belt. He drove it upward, feeling it bite deep. The outlaw staggered back, blood mixing with the rain, eyes wide with shock. One last breath rattled from him before he fell face first into the mud. The yard was suddenly still except for the crackle of the barn fire. The other men, seeing their leader down, melted into the darkness, their retreat swallowed by the storm. He stood there for a long moment, the rain cooling the heat of the fight. The ache in his shoulder was sharp, but not mortal. He stepped to the cellar hatch and pulled it open. The girls emerged slowly, eyes scanning the yard. "It's over," he said. They looked toward the barn, toward the fallen man in the mud. The taller one knelt by the outlaw, her hand hovering over him as if to confirm he was real, and then she stood, her face unreadable. By dawn, the fire had burned itself to blackened beams. Smoke rose in thin streams, carried off by the wind. They buried the body beneath the cottonwood, the girls working beside him without complaint. When it was done, the shorter one set a small bundle wrapped in cloth in the grave, a keepsake of their father. She explained quietly, something that belonged with the end of this chapter. They stood together as the first light reached across the land, touching the wet grass, the fence, the scarred boards of the cabin. The prairie was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence, one that carried the weight of all that happened and all that might yet come. The rancher looked at the horizon. The wind took the last curls of smoke away, leaving only the wide, open sky. The scar along his ribs throbbed, not with pain, but with memory. It would stay,